I've been doing some paint tests. I'm about to build a helmet, Astrid's helmet from How to Train Your Dragon 3. So I wanted to make sure that I got the color of those dragon scales perfect before I ruined the helmet part. So I made some of these sample pieces. They're all EVA foam. They've all been coated with Mod Podge to seal them, which is how I'm gonna do the entire helmet. And then it's gonna get painted with a combination of paints. Paints, by the way, which are from today's sponsor, Plaid Crafts, specifically the folk art paints, and I really like these color shift paints. So I've tried them in a variety of different combinations here. So for example, this one over here is very shimmery and glittery, maybe not perfect for my dragon scale, but it is really cool. This one over here is closer to what I actually want to pull off, with a blue base coat and then some of the color shift paint on top of it. So I'm gonna go with something similar to this. I really dig how the color shift paint really adds that fun metallic shine to it. In fact, this is the sort of thing that could be used to enhance a great number of different props and costumes. In fact, if you have a project or a costume or prop you think would benefit for something as cool as these neat color shift paints, please let me know. I'm always looking for more ideas. You can tell me down in the comments. All right, I'm armed with everything I need to know to paint my helmet. I should probably go build it. Let's head over to the workbench and get started. To get started on the fabrication of our helmet, I'm gonna need a pattern, and I've already made one. I spent the last couple days working on this, got it all knocked out, printed and cut out. There's a link down in the description for a free download of this if you want to follow along. Got my foam, going with HD foam today. My buddy Steve Smith left this here last time he was visiting. This is 10 millimeters thick. Should be good, I think, for almost all of our parts on the helmet. My pattern pieces are here, so I can start tracing them out. The pattern you download has all the left pieces, so to do the right pieces, you just flip it over. I like to hold my patterns down with weights, like this 1, 2, 3 block. And then these notches here are for registration. So I want to make sure I get a line on each one of those so that when I'm gluing these parts together, I know where they line up. Those lines are super critical. I'm also labeling just left and right. I can always check which piece is which by matching it with our template here, because I'm not going to throw this away. But at least I know the left side and the right side. Some of these template pieces have a circle here or here. These are meant to be a pivot point so that the visor can slide open and closed. I was not able to figure out how to get it to work with this thickness of foam. So I'm going to make my helmet completely static. However, when you're building yours, you may choose to try and tinker with that and get the mechanism to work. If you do, I want to see it, so please send me a photo over on Twitter. Here are all my parts, at least for the helmet. We do have some spikes to make later, but you can see this full sheet of foam, we've only used about 1/3 of it. And a sheet of foam like this you can get for less than 20 bucks. So we're talking less than 10 bucks for all of these parts. And we have plenty left over in case we goof up, which is awesome, because I probably will. For now, it's time to start cutting. I can liberate all my parts. And I think a lot of these I'm gonna cut out on the bandsaw, but you could totally just use a knife. I'm cutting this into smaller pieces just to make it a little more manageable over at the saw. One of the reasons I like using the bandsaw for all my detail cuts is that the blade is always perpendicular to the surface that I'm cutting. If you accidentally tip the blade while you're cutting, those seams that you want to glue together will have, instead of being perfectly matched up like that, they will have a peak or a valley. We don't want that. So whenever I can, I will use the bandsaw to eliminate my human error. These mortal stumps that are at the end of my hands that can't be trusted to cut things accurately. So we use a machine. And I also really need to sharpen this knife. I call this piece deconstructed helmet. All of my helmet pieces are here, but they're all flat. I need to glue them together to make the form. But to help them along the way, I'm gonna heat these pieces up a little bit and kind of pre-form them so that they will more easily want to be three-dimensional rather than flat pieces. For that, got my handy heat gun. Just warm it up a little bit. And then I know this piece is going to curve a little bit like that, and then it's also gonna wrap around my face kind of like that. We can heat form this more once the pieces are glued together, but this little bit of work is gonna help us out a whole bunch later. You can see there's the rounded off piece and there's the flat one. Just a little bit of help, that's all it needs. You can see this piece still has a curve in it from when the foam was all rolled up, and we actually want it the opposite curve so it more closely matches the helmet form. So again, just heat it up. Then we can just kind of help it along its way. Maybe give it a little bit more of a curve in that direction. Now when we're gluing these pieces together, they will want to bend in the correct direction. It's time to start gluing all of the edges that need to go together, and I'm gonna do the helmet in halves. So this is all the left half for the dome part right here, and these two edges get glued together, these two edges get glued together. This will be the midline going straight down the middle of the helmet from back to front. I'm not gonna glue that yet. I'm gonna attach all of these and the other half, all of these, and then I will attach those together. I've just found that's easier to do than to try and just keep tacking pieces on until you make the whole dome. So I'm gonna grab my barge, get gluing. I tend to work in batches, so I got these pieces all glued up and I'm letting them dry, but this is the one I did first and it's dry enough that I can tack together, so I'll do that. This is where I really take my time, make sure these registration lines line up, and also make sure that the two pieces of foam are nice and level, not one higher or lower than the other one. And there's no need to rush. We got plenty of working time with our contact cement. I'm just gonna slowly work my way down. You can see too, as I press this together, I'm starting to get this dome shape. So the foam is working for us now. And then once everything's lined up, I'll go back over the seam and just really push on everything to get it together like that. And then I can grab the next one and add it to the mix. There we go, that's half of the rear portion of the helmet. I'll just do the other one and then stick them together. These will become three pieces. There's some of the more simpler parts. They don't really have a label for where they attach because they only have one edge. So these are the back collar, and that just gets stuck together like that to make this nice long piece like so. Same thing with this fella here. Just gets stuck together nice and easy right there. And then this is the front that goes over my mouth, kind of like that. There we go. Really press that together. That'll get rounded a little bit more, and then it will go right around here. These pieces are for the visor. This is the front of the helmet, and I tried to put these seams in areas where they'll be hidden or there'll be some sort of detail. And also this piece does not glue all the way down there. It glues a little way up so that eventually this line here will be the middle of the helmet, going right down the middle of your forehead. Of course, this will be the eye hole. And press all these together. That's looking okay. Then the lower cheek portion, I think I'll start up here. And there is a gap here where the eye goes. So we want that to line up. And then this part goes over here. And just like before, I've only done half of this. I'll go put the other half together, and then we'll glue those two halves, those two completed halves together. Hey, now I can stick them together. And this is right front and center, so I definitely want to make sure it looks pretty. There are ways to touch up a seam, and we will do some of that later, but the closer we can get the lines or edges to match up now, the better it will be for us in the future. Pressing these halves together are what really give this helmet its distinctive form. There we go, got everything pressed together. This is where 4 seams intersect, so we want to make sure those line up as well as we can. I will come back and tidy that up a little bit, but we want to make sure it's as good as possible now. I will have to do a little more heat forming, but you can see now it's got that distinctive profile that I was going for from the reference. Kind of a hard cut down to the nose right there. There are some details, these spikes that go up off of here, so I made my seam lines right where those spikes are going to be so that they can cover parts of the seam. I won't have to clean all of them up. Smarter, not harder. This is the back of the head. When I press this together, I'm just kind of tacking it in place, and then I go back and I press it together. It's really hard to get a good grip with such a large piece in each hand. So I really just want to make sure that it looks like it's in the right spot first, and then I'll come back after it's pressed together and really horse on those edges. You can even invert the foam to press this top edge together. The pieces are looking great so far. So this is the front part here, the visor, and the dome there, and it's going to go together kind of like that. And then the mouth portion goes down here, or this part here. And then the other pieces are just a couple of decorative parts in the back. Before I move forward and start adding detail, I do want to reinforce these. I want to make sure they are the correct width. So I'm going to measure my head. I have this calipers that I made. You could make your own out of a piece of cardboard if you want, but I can measure the width of my head about there from ear tip to ear tip. And then I can use my ruler down here on my cutting mat to see that my head is about 7 inches wide. So I'll take a piece of scrap foam and cut it 7 inches, and I'm going to glue it in place to hold this at the appropriate width. I'm going to use a little super glue to tack it down. I can rip this out later when I'm done with it. For now, this is meant to just be kind of temporary. There we go. The other benefit of this is now I have a handle so I can hold this if I got to hang it to paint it or anything. Got my handles installed on the two main parts. I'm going to work on these separately before they get attached. I made this one an inch wider, or 20 millimeters wider, because this is 10 millimeters and there's the same amount on either side, and now it fits perfectly over the other one, which is how it will be once it's all done. But for now, I can start refining these, and I think I want to start by just rounding over all of the harsh edges with my rotary tool. The neck parts in the back here also need the edges to be rounded over, but I need a bevel. So in here there's a bevel on the inside so that when I place this part in here, it'll tilt out a little bit. And then I have to add that bevel to the back side of this one so that when I add this piece, it also tilts back. So I'm gonna do both of those things, round over all the edges and then add a nice bevel on here, maybe like 15, 20 degrees. Just gonna eyeball it, it'll be fine. Now I need to put glue on the inside of this bevel here and on the outside of this so that when I press them together, they will glue it like that. Same thing for the next part. It's gonna go under that guy. So I need glue on the back of this where I have beveled it and on the top of that. Nice and dry, and I can stick my parts together. And this is just getting glued to the inside lip where I put that bevel. And I can keep this one away with this hand while I tack this part down with my other hand. There we go, and now the next one can go in as well. Press that all together all nice like, and we have a nice sort of flare out there, and I think that looks great. This part is all assembled, but it's meant to be very smooth, and unfortunately, due to the design, we had to put seams through it. So we can do our best to fill those in using some caulk, and I'm just going to start using my little tool here to mash it in there, and then I'll smooth it over, and it should look really nice. This stuff is air drying, so we just have to fill in our seam, and we can let it dry. We can also go over it with a wet finger, just have a little water here to smooth it out a bit. You can kind of sand it once it's dry, but getting it as smooth as possible before then helps a lot. So I'm just gonna do the same thing over the rest of the seams. While my caulk is drying, I can work on this part, and there is a distinct lack of spikes on this part of the helmet, so we're gonna make some. I made up some patterns for all my spikes, and the idea here is there's a wider part at the bottom, and we're gonna add that later, so I've cut it out to just this slim profile. This is where the wider part starts, but for now, all I need to do is cut all of these out of my 10 millimeter foam. The center two here, I only need one of those, and then for the other ones, I need 2 each. I'm saying that out loud now, just so that I remember to do that and read the directions. like that, and then that goes kind of these will go here. This is the middle one and the other middle one. It's so spiky. I love it. Ah, it's awesome. So these are obviously not perfectly flat if they were dragon spikes. So I'm gonna go in with my rotary tool, make a whole bunch more dust, and bevel the front and back edges of these fellas. My spike army is nearly prepared. Now I've redrawn these lines just so I can tell where to put my 2mm foam. The idea is I'm gonna put glue on here, and then I can wrap it up like so, right? And then I'll trim it. Going with contact cement again on this part. This will make wrapping the 2mm foam around these spikes a lot easier. And then I'm gonna cover this up to that edge. My spikes are ready to do some more assembly. You can see I put this on a stick so that I could let that dry. Now the weird circus act that is wrapping this around. Seems like the best way is to lay this about halfway down, right in the middle there, and then press it into the surface. Now this will not want to line up with that, but the good thing about foam is you can just stretch it to fit your needs. All of this is extra, so while I'm here, I'm just gonna remove some of that to make my life a little easier. This needs to come around like that, and then I'll cut a seam there. It helps if you have a very sharp knife for this kind of work. Now, we can do the same thing on this side. And we'll cut where the other side of the seam goes. And this seam I can put together with super glue. So I'll just put a little bead of glue down in there and then pinch it closed. If there's any squeeze out, I can wipe it off with a paper towel. And then I've got my super glue accelerant to kick it off. Wipe away the extra, and the seam is nice and clean. We'll go in with the rotary tool to tidy that up, and we can make that seam go away too. Time to attach our horns, our spikes. Horns, talons, spikes. Time to attach our spikes. This one goes all the way to the back, so that's easy. I'm just marking where it's gonna go because I have to put some contact cement on the helmet part. And then the smaller one is gonna go in front of it, and I think the end of it is gonna go to that registration mark right there. The rest of these spikes go down the side, and I designed them to cover these seams, or at least part of it. So that one goes there. This one goes down on the bottom there, and then we'll have a smaller one below it. Those all look like they're in the right spot. I know where to put all my spikes, so now I can put all my contact cement on here and on the spikes. Woo! Boy, would my face have been red. To hide all these seams, on the reference, there's definitely some sort of detail in those areas, and I think it's supposed to be like a strip of leather or something. So that's the way I'm gonna roll with it. And I have some more 2mm foam. I'm just cutting some thin strips out of some scrap here. I have my see-through ruler with a metal edge. Very important. The metal edge means my knife will not cut into the plastic. Just like that. So I'm just cutting out a bunch of these, and then we'll glue them down. They're also gonna go around the eyes. It looks like there's some sort of raised detail around the eyes. The strip of foam that's going around the eye is gonna go in two pieces, one there and one up there. Where they meet, I'm gonna cut like a 45 off of the end there. I'll glue that down at that corner. And I'm just using super glue for this. Contact cement would work, but the super glue has a little more finesse, a little more accuracy. And if you press it and you have a nice thin layer of glue, it'll dry almost immediately. And now I can continue around the eye. Just press it down around. And there is going to be some glue squeeze out. There's no way you're going to do any of this without getting super glue all over your fingers. That's just the cost of this craft. I'm just trying to get that top edge to stick down. In hindsight, I probably didn't need to round over the edge of the lid right there because I want this to kind of lay flat if I can. This is going to get cut just along the seam there. That. And then we will do the other one. Going to continue and start covering up some of these seams. Again, more super glue and more of this 2mm foam. I can just tack it down along the seam there. I can just wrap this around the bottom. There we go. So nice. Time to attach the lower part of the visor. I had to move my handle here a little bit so that I had room to put that in there, but all set. Now, I think what I'm gonna do is just put a layer of contact cement on the inside lip here, and then on this guy, the same thing up here, and then I can press it all in carefully. So maybe like a 1/2 inch of contact cement along the edge on either side. Stick. Just gonna try and carefully tack this into place. I can press that together now. It won't go together because my handles are in there, but kind of like that. Quick pause. I am not happy with what's going on here. This line should continue more curved, and I think this spike just needs to be tipped down a little bit. Fortunately, since I just glued that a little while ago, I should be able to take that off with some thinner for my contact cement, and brush it on the seam. And it should, yes, it's working. As I work, I can just brush a little bit more in until it pops off. I got a fan going too. This is pure toluene, which is not good to breathe. There we go. This will have to come off as well, although that's super glue and I have a different solvent for that. Of course, everything must be symmetrical, so for super glue I have this uncure. Normally I use this to unglue my fingers from things, but I should be able to use it to remove this part here. That seems a lot less effective. I'm just gonna cut this off. This part here is going to get covered in scales, so I'm not too worried about these blemishes. They'll get covered. Just happy little accidents. Now to amend my boo-boo. Have that follow that line. Much better. Got another piece of foam to cover that seam. You didn't see anything, except for that. Look at this handsome fella. Looking great. What he needs is some scales up on the top of the dome portion here, and for that I've already made a pattern. This is designed to be repeated over and over again, so you can cut out this pattern and cut out as many scales as you want in a variety of shapes and sizes. I'll be using 2mm foam for that. These are the scales that we're looking to replicate here, and I do have some tiny ones because there are some spots that will need some little guys, but most of them are going to be these big scales. And this pattern that I made, you can even cut out your pattern and then use the piece as a stencil, the negative space as a stencil. So I can use it over and over again, and it's a lot easier to handle than a tiny little piece of paper like that. I can just take this, take my foam, slide it under, and trace out my scale. In fact, I could trace out a bunch of this size and shape of scale if I wanted to. And then using that same knife, I can go in and cut it out. I could even, I don't need to be super precise with this, because if these scales don't end up identical, that's okay, they shouldn't be. These little scales will get glued down, but before we do that, well, of course I have to cut out a whole bunch more, but also the edges should be rounded over just a tiny bit. And we'll do that with a rotary tool. Behold all my scales. They're rounded over just on one side. The bottom side is flat. We're gonna glue that down. And a bunch of ways to do this. Super glue would be great for tacking down tiny things, but I think I can do it with contact cement quickly. I'm gonna brush contact cement on just parts. So let's say this area here on the helmet, we'll work in stages, that part, that part, that part, that part. Then I have double-sided tape on this piece of wood, like that, and I'm gonna take my scales and put them face down on the tape so I can brush contact cement on the back and they won't go flying everywhere, and then I should be able to peel them off and stick them down. Piece of cake. What could possibly go wrong? I am very happy with how our scales turned out. I tried to mix it up, put some of the smaller ones on the thinner detailed parts here. That's gonna be really great when we paint it. It's got all that texture to work with. Yeah. Pretty soon I can attach these two parts, but I do want to do a little bit of work on the back of the helmet. The caulking I put on here can be sanded a little bit. It is flexible, so it may tear if you are a little aggressive, but I've got some 220 grit paper here. I can just knock down any fingerprints or just lasting textures that I don't want around anymore. So I'm going to do that, and then we'll probably have to figure out how to attach these parts. And also, make sure it still fits on my head. I'm trying to figure out how to attach these, and it looks like I'm gonna have to remove a little bit of this to get everything to fit together so that this part here doesn't intersect with it. I've been testing the sizing on this copy of my head, which is really, really handy. So I'm pretty sure that this is where these need to go. So I'm going to remove that much right there. So now these parts can lock together nice and snug where they need to go. And this surface, or the back of this surface and this surface are flush so that I can glue them together. I've come up with a strategy for gluing these parts together, and I'm going to do it in 2 steps. The first step, well, this part goes in like that, about like that. So I have a line where I know where that ought to go. I'm going to put some glue just on the top here where the top of the helmet contacts this part on the inside, and then I'm going to stick the middle top down, and then I'm going to brush on my glue on the sides and then stick that down. My concern is that this stuff, when it touches, it sticks permanently, and if I cover this whole area in glue and try and shimmy this in there, it's gonna get stuck in the wrong spot. So that's why I'm doing it in 2 steps. I'm really just making sure that this is centered, like the center line here and the center line inside there match up. That all wants to fit together. It looks kind of like it's in the right spot, so I can press it together. So the helmet is in there, and now I want to put a little glue in here so I can stick this together on both sides. Before I go brushing any contact cement in there, I want to make sure these pieces stay apart while the glue dries. So I just have a hunk of foam I can jam in there so that these pieces stay away from one another. 5 minutes have passed. Get out of here. Don't need you. Now I can put everything together carefully, and everything fits together perfectly. Of course, the ultimate test is to see if it still fits on my head. It's a little snug. Oh, but it fits just fine. Look at that. What a dapper gentleman he is. Next step is going to be to seal this whole thing and get it ready for paint. I'll heat seal it with a heat gun and get rid of some of these fuzzy bits. And then we're gonna seal it with Mod Podge. You guys know Mod Podge. We use this all the time on foam projects like this. In fact, Mod Podge is made by today's sponsor, Plaid. And not only do they make Mod Podge and all the different Mod Podge varieties, but they make a lot more stuff too. I'm especially excited about these paints. These are color shift paints. I think will look really good as dragon scales. I have some other flat base colors here that we can use, as well as some ways to seal our paint. We've got plenty of paint brushes And I even got a fancy new paint palette because mine's looking really gross. Pretty much Plaid has something for every project you're working on, especially for us and all these wonderful paints and sealants for our cosplay. I think the thing I like the most is that I can go out and get this stuff locally, no need to order it. I get mine around here at either Joann's or Michael's. But if you're in the States, you can look at Walmart or Ace Hardware stores, seem to have a lot of their stuff. And if you're international, they've got a page on their website where you can go find where to get their stuff wherever you happen to live. We'll have links to all of these products down below, as well as links and information where you can find out where to get them. Thank you, Plaid Crafts, for sponsoring the video and sending us all of this wonderful stuff to work with on our project. Now it's time to get to sealing. I've got two flavors here, both the matte and the glossy, and I'm gonna try the glossy. I've never actually used this before. I'm just gonna cover the whole thing. I'm using a sponge brush to minimize any brush strokes on there. So here we go. Mash, 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 mash. Now obviously the handle that I had on the inside of this is gone. I removed that so I could put it on this head. But if you don't have a head to put your helmet on while you're working on it, that handle will be really useful. I'm stippling right now to make sure that I drive a lot of that Mod Podge down in between all of my scales. This is going to, well, once it all dries, I'm probably going to put a couple layers on here, 2 or 3 layers. But once all that dries, it's going to provide us with a nice, smooth finish for our paint job. It's going to help level out any unwanted textures. But for the most part, it's going to make it so that the paint sits on this surface nicely and you don't get that, the cells of the foam showing through. The stippling is really cool. On some of the parts, like down here, this is, I'm thinking, meant to look like leather. So I may leave some stippling there on purpose, which I think will look really cool. But other parts, once I've covered them, I'll just brush over them to remove any excess. These scales are, in fact, supposed to be kind of shiny and smooth. So that's what we're going for there. Our Mod Podge is nice and dry. I did a couple of different techniques on here to get some different textures. Any of the spots that don't have scales I think are meant to be leather. So I did some stippling with my sponge brush to get a little bit of a texture on there. And then for these spikes, to get more of a kind of a grain to it, I used a chip brush to add streaks intentionally along the length of the spikes. Hopefully that'll help us later when we're painting and adding some depth and contrast with a couple different washes. Before I can start painting, there are just a couple more details to add in the form of googly eyes. Googly eyes are a time-honored tradition of adding rivets to props. This one is a little bit of a bigger one. There's supposed to be a pivot right here on this helmet, and it pivots around a rivet or a bolt or something right there. So that's what this googly eye is meant to be. I'm just sanding it so it'll take paint better, and then I'm just going to super glue it in place. Actually, I should sand the back of that, shouldn't I? Give it a little more tooth to grab onto with the glue. There, that looks good. Cool. On my pattern, I put spots here for the rivet details on the lower part so I can mark where those are meant to go before gluing on those. You could use more googly eyes. I'm fresh out of smaller ones, but I do have these weird round sticker things. I have no idea what these are, but they are adhesive backed, and I can sand them while they're still on the backing, and then I can just stick them on my, my helmet. And again, this just makes it easier for paint to grab onto it. That shiny glossy surface right there, the paint will just chip right off. It's no good. Stick. Yeah, that's on there. Fantastic. Doesn't matter what color these are, they're all gonna get painted. Next step, primer. That gray primer really shows off all the texture over here on the side and the more leather parts. I love it. We're ready for paint. I'm thinking base coat of brown on everything. Some of these parts, like the thin bits here, are supposed to be like a brown leather. So I figure everything gets base coated brown and then I cover everything else up that's a different color. I've got a new palette from Plaid, and check it out. You put a plate in it, and then when you're done, you can just throw that plate away. So I need to mix up a brown. I've got a great brown right here. I think I want to darken it just a hair with some black. Oh, I think this is going to be fantastic. I also got a whole bunch of new brushes from Plaid, so I'm excited to work with nice new brushes. Looking pretty great here. Dry to the touch, gave it like half an hour to dry. Time for a new color. I'm gonna do this portion and the spikety bits here in like a bone yellow. One of the things I actually really like about this palette is I can just chuck that, grab another plate, or I could stack a bunch of them in there, even better. Mix up some new colors. And I guess I could put some other paints in here if I was gonna use those. But for now, I'm just gonna mix up some yellow, maybe a little orange, maybe even a little brown to get that bone color. This yellow looks okay. I think I might, I'm definitely gonna need 2 layers, so I think I might tweak the color a little bit on the next layer, but it's looking pretty good. Same paint up here, only my brush is nearly dry, and I'm just skating across the surface, and all of the Mod Podge texture that we added is picking up the paint on the highlights, but the low spots are staying dark. So we have that nice contrast there. And I'll do another pass of this yellow paint, a slightly different shade. So we'll have a couple of different colors going on here all mixed together. It'll look really nice. I'm putting on a second layer of the yellow. In this case, I mixed a little yellow in with pure white to get a much lighter yellow. And I like this a lot better. Mixing up a gray blue for the sort of darker, I guess they're leather. There's like brown leather and there's this darker bluish leather for the back of the head and the cheeks. I really like this blue. Blue is my favorite color. And this is a particularly nice shade. This is the cheek area that we added this lovely texture to, and it needs to be blue. But these parts are supposed to be brown, I think. We're working from screenshots, and in the movie, the lighting changes, the angle, everything changes, and it can be kind of tricky to figure out all the colors. So we're kind of shooting from the hip today, but I think in the end, we'll have a really pretty looking helmet, so I'll be happy. It is finally time to paint the scales, and I wanted to keep the brown base coat there so that when I paint the scales blue, that brown in the crevices stays there, so we have that nice contrast. I'm gonna mix a similar blue to this for most of the scales, but I have a little purple in there, and I'm gonna kind of randomly pick some to be a slightly different shade. Then the idea is I'll put on a couple layers of blue and then go over that with our color shift paint. We are nearing the finish line. I got all of my scales painted. I put 2 coats of paint on each scale. Took about 2 hours if you're curious. I let that dry a bit, and then everything got sealed with this Mod Podge acrylic sealer. I went with the matte, and then the next thing I want to do is just a little bit of weathering. And the reference is it looks pretty clean, but I want more contrast, especially down here, and I figure just a dark brown wash over the whole thing might help it pop a little more. Mixing up a kind of a tan color for the mouth area. We want contrast, but we don't want it to be like super, super dark. Lightening it up with a little bit of white. Get closer to that pale tan. Yeah, that's pretty nice. This will all get thinned with some water. We'll do a quick wash. Just going nutty here, covering everything up. And then I've got a towel I can use to clean most of that off, especially the high spots on these scales. So now there's just a little bit of darker contrast in between all the scales. Before and after. These parts that are meant to look like leather, I want to call out that texture, and I have just like the barest amount of tan or brown paint on there, and I'm wiping pretty much all of it off, and then very carefully just scuffing across the surface and adding a tiny little bit of paint, just to give this a little more lovely color contrast. I nearly forgot these little rivet details here need to be painted. I want something metallic. I'm gonna go with this chocolate brown, which is like a darker bronze looking color. That's gonna be amazing. To paint these quickly, I made a little stencil. I just cut a circle and a piece of masking tape. That can go right on there. I think it'll take a couple of coats, but that looks really nice. I could probably paint this one by hand without a stencil. I'm going rogue. Those are looking very shiny. Now, just a little bit more dirtying up. The blue leather parts, I think, need a little bit of grime on them. So I've got some dark brown paint watered down a lot. Just gonna do another pass of a wash. This has gotta be one of my favorite parts. All the texture on here from the Mod Podge stippling, this is when it pays off, because now it's gonna grab all that paint and we'll have some nice blues and browns kind of modeled together. Actually, now's a great time to thank Plaid again for sponsoring this build, this video, and of course for sending us all of these fantastic products. These will all be linked down in the description if you want to try them out for yourself. I'd also like to thank our Extra Credit Club. Thank you guys so much for the support over the years. We'll have a link to the Extra Credit Club page down in the description if you want to find out how you can become a member. Thank you guys so much for the extra help, and I hope you appreciate all the extra content that we make for you. Of course, if you'd like to build one of these helmets yourself or something similar, I have patterns for free on our website, also linked down below. We have a bunch of other free patterns and blueprints and stuff over on our website too, if you want to poke around and see if there's any other projects you'd like to give a try. And of course, if you're new to the channel here, you're going to want to subscribe because we make prop and costume videos every single week. We have an awful lot of fun doing it, and I recommend you not missing a single one. Now, finally, it's time to do our color shifting paint. I'm going for something similar to this. I have all of these painted, they're blue and purple colors, but I'm going to go over them with one layer of the color shift paint. It's fairly translucent. The blue and purple should pop through, but we should also get that really fun color shift. Oh. Ooh. It's finally all done. I can't believe just a couple of days ago, this was a pile of floor mats and paint. And now it's a dragon helmet that I can wear on my head. I love the paint on here. It looks so shimmery and wonderful. And I imagine that's exactly what dragon scales look like. All I have to do now is put this thing right on my noggin. Here we go. Yeah! I'll heat seal it with a heat gun, get rid of some of these fuzzy bits, and then we're gonna seal it with I made this in the last couple of days and printed it out and cutted it out. I cutted it out. I'm gonna do it really well this time, Britt. Look at this pro. Huh? First try. I did get a lot of nose grease on my glasses. That is really gross.